such a huge and enthusiastic crowd here tonight. We're so excited about this event. I'm Melissa Muscatine. I'm one of the co-owners of Politics and Prose Bookstore, and on behalf of our entire staff, we welcome you here to George Washington University's Lisner Auditorium. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to say a few words about the political events of the past week, and in particular, I want to say something about the role of independent bookstores at times like these. We at Politics and Prose are very proud that, like many other independent bookstores across our country, our mission has always been to inform and educate our communities, to expand dialogue and understanding across the political spectrum, and to provide a forum for civic discourse. And at P&P, we do this through the careful curation of thousands of books we carry on a very diverse range of topics, through hundreds of author events each year like this one, but perhaps not quite this big, through courses and classes and trips in the United States and beyond our borders, and through community book groups and other activities. But never has our role as an independent bookstore been more important than it is today, and will be tomorrow and hereafter. And we have told our customers, and I want to reiterate this tonight, Politics and Prose will continue with even more energy and more determination and more dedication in our mission of providing our community with books, ideas, and conversations that we all need to be engaged, thoughtful, and responsible citizens. We also, by the way, have special activities planned for January and the lead up to the inauguration and beyond, so please stay tuned for that and join us as we continue to strengthen our community and the values that we all hold dear. Tonight, we're excited to host a man who helped change the political conversation in America over the last 18 months. Especially young people, in demanding a different kind of politics, and who against all odds seriously contended for the Democratic Party nomination for president, winning 22 primaries and caucuses and some 13 million votes. He's a former mayor, a former congressman, two-term U.S. senator from Vermont, a champion of progressives across our country, and today appointed to the Democratic leadership circle in the Senate. Bookstore person, he's an author now too. His new book, Our Revolution, A Future to Believe In, just came out yesterday. In it, he talks about the themes and issues that served as a call to action during his 2016 presidential campaign, and he emphasizes that political transformation is an ongoing project, one that must continue well after an election ends. And it is our pleasure to be able to host Senator Bernie Sanders here tonight. We'll speak to all of you, and then there'll be a conversation after that with one of the leading political commentators and thinkers in America today, also a dear friend of ours, E.J. Dionne. You might run into him in the Halsey Brookings Institution, where he's a senior fellow. You read his brilliant syndicated column each week in the Washington Post and in 140 newspapers nationwide. You see him on MSNBC, you hear him on NPR, and maybe if you're a student at Georgetown, sorry to have to mention Georgetown here, but maybe if you're a student at Georgetown, you're in one of his classes on politics, and hopefully all of you have read his most recent book, the New York Times bestseller, Why the Right Went Wrong. In all of his roles as a commentator and public thinker, E.J. has been particularly eloquent and forceful in holding our politicians, our political parties, and our political system to account when they stray from our democratic values and liberties or fail to protect the most marginalized among us. It also turns out that he's quite prescient. Back in October of 2015, he predicted on the air that Bernie Sanders could win Iowa and New Hampshire. We're in for a very exciting conversation tonight, but with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Senator Bernie Sanders.
you very much. Thank all of you for coming out. I can't quite see you, but I understand there are a lot of people out there. Thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to chatting with EJ in a few moments. But before we do, I just wanted to say a few words about the election and where we are today. Because I know there are a lot of people who are frightened, a lot of people who are extremely unhappy, and I would not be telling you the truth if I didn't tell you that Tuesday night was a very, very depressing evening for me. But I want to maybe begin by telling you that as a result of having the privilege and the opportunity of running all over this country, going to 46 states during my campaign, I ended the campaign far, far more optimistic than when I began that campaign. And the reason for that is all over this country, I saw extraordinarily beautiful people, working people, young people who love this country and who are determined to do everything that they can to make the United States of America the kind of nation we know we can become. As we move into the Trump era, is to understand that real change and real politics never takes place from the top on down. It always occurs from the bottom on up. What that means, in my view, is that when millions of people stand together and they refuse to allow demagoguery to divide us up by race, by the country we were born in, by our sexual orientation, when we stand together by the millions, we can stop Mr. Trump or anyone else from doing bad things. Just mentioned, what I have always believed is that election days are very, very important days, to be sure, and elections are enormously important. But politics is not just about elections. If you think about our history as a nation and the profound changes that have taken place, what you understand is that change only takes place when millions of people look around them and they say that the status quo is not working and are prepared to fight for social, racial, economic, and environmental justice. Just want to, in terms of the election, make 3 points. Number one, in case you don't know, and I'm sure most of you do, Hillary Clinton ended up winning the popular vote by what we think, after all the votes are counted, by about 2 million votes. Number two, if you are a progressive, on issue after issue, whether it is raising the minimum wage to a living wage, whether it is pay equity for women, whether it is rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure and creating millions of decent-paying jobs, whether it is reforming a broken criminal justice system or a broken immigration system, whether it is making public colleges or universities tuition-free, whether it is demanding that the wealthy start paying their fair share of taxes. On all of those issues and more, the American people are on our side. Don't ever forget that. During the course of his campaign, Mr. Trump, and I should tell you that in that campaign I was as active as I could be. During the last week of that campaign, I was in 12 battleground states giving 21 speeches and rallies all over this country, because I thought that it was absolutely imperative that we do everything that we can to make sure that Hillary Clinton was elected and not Donald Trump. But it didn't turn out that way. And here is where we are today. It seems to me four things. Number one, 5 things, who knows? During the course of his campaign, which clearly, and we have to acknowledge this, was certainly one of the most unusual campaigns ever run by a candidate. Mr. Trump said a whole lot of things. A whole lot of things, and sometimes I think they would just come off the top of his head. And toward the end of the campaign, he was actually using the term that many Democrats don't use. He was saying that he was going to be the champion of the American working class. That's what he said. Well, Mr. Trump, we have a list of everything that you said, and we are going to hold you to account. Mr. Trump did, and this speaks to why I personally believe we need major reforms of the Democratic Party. What Mr. Trump said and talked about is something that the pundits here in Washington have not a clue about, and the corporate media has very little understanding about. And that is that what he understood to be true, and it is true, is despite the fact that today we are far better off economically after 8 years of Obama than we were when Bush left office, that is true. There is another reality, and that is that all across this country there are millions and millions of decent, good people who are frightened about the world that they are living in. There are mothers out there, single moms or young couples, who are making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Mom and dad are working. They need child care for their children, and yet child care costs $10,000 or $15,000. How do you afford $15,000 for child care when you're making $40,000 or $50,000 a year? There are workers in my state who see an explosion in technology. They see the very wealthiest people in this country becoming phenomenally richer. They see large corporations enjoying record-breaking profits. And yet they are working not at one job, they're working at 2 jobs, they are working at 3 jobs. There are people all over this country who are 55, 60 years of age. They have worked their entire lives, and now they are going to be retiring soon. And you know what? Half of those older workers do not have a nickel in the bank for retirement. There are young people who went deeply into debt, $30,000, $50,000, $80,000 in debt in order to go to college. But when they leave school, they find that the only jobs they can get are jobs which pay them $12, $14 an hour, not enough to repay their debt. That is the reality for millions of people in this country. And that is the reality of a middle class which has been in decline for the last 40 years. That is the reality of 43 million fellow Americans who today are living in poverty, something that we do not talk about at all, not mentioned on television, and some in dire poverty. We are living in a nation which has a grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, in which the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And that is the reality that Mr. Trump perceived to be true. And he said, I hear you are hurting. And I hear and understand you're worried about the future for your kids. And I alone can do something about it. And people voted for him. Now let me just tell you some of what Mr. Trump talked about. And we're going to hold him accountable. Mr. Trump said, unlike many Republicans, the vast majority of Republicans, he says, he will not cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, I believe we should expand Social Security. I believe in a Medicare for all program. That is what he said. And pay attention to see what he now does. The question that will be resolved pretty quickly is whether or not everything that he was saying to the working families of this country was hypocrisy, was dishonest, or whether he was sincere. And we will find that out soon enough. But number one, no cuts, says Mr. Trump, to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Mr. Trump says he wants to invest $1 trillion in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. That is a good sum of money. That is exactly what we should be doing. And we can create millions of good-paying jobs if we do that. Mr. Trump, that's what you said on the campaign trail. That's what we look forward to seeing from you. I happen to believe that the federal minimum wage of $7.25 today is a starvation wage, that it should be raised to $15 an hour, a living wage. Mr. Trump did not say that, but what he did say is we should raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour. Not enough, but a start. And we will hold him to those words. Mr. Trump said that Wall Street, dangerous, doing bad things. He wants to reestablish Glass-Steagall legislation. I look forward to working with him. Trump said he wants 6 weeks of paid maternity leave. Every other major country on earth has, I think, at least 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, but this is a start. This is a start. We look forward to working with him if he is honest about that. Mr. Trump said throughout his campaign, a cornerstone of his campaign, he wants to change our disastrous trade policies. As somebody who voted against every one of these trade policies, I look forward to working with him to make that happen. You will see on Capitol Hill is many Democrats will be prepared to work with Mr. Trump if he turns out to be sincere about the promises he made during the campaign. If those promises turn out to be hollow, if they were nothing more than campaign rhetoric, we will not only oppose his economic policies, we will expose that hypocrisy as well. There is an area where I think I can speak for virtually every member of the Democratic caucus, will not be working with Mr. Trump. We will not be involved in the expansion of bigotry, of racism, sexism. This country, as you all know, since our inception, has struggled to overcome discrimination of all forms. and that is racism and sexism, and xenophobia and homophobia. For hundreds of years, extraordinarily brave people have stood up, and some of them have died in the struggle to end discrimination in America. And I say to Mr. Trump from the bottom of my heart, and I know I speak for millions of fellow Americans, Mr. Trump, we are not going backwards in terms of bigotry. We're going to go forward in creating a non-discriminatory society. I call upon Mr. Trump to rescind the appointment that he made of Mr. A President of the United States should not have a racist at his side. Unacceptable. And there is another area which concerns me very much. And that is, despite virtually all of the scientific evidence, Mr. Trump throughout his campaign proclaimed that his view is that climate change is a hoax created, for whatever reason, in China. And I say to Mr. Trump, climate change is not a hoax. It is the great planetary crisis that we face. And that if we do not act boldly to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, the planet that we will be leaving to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will be far less healthy and habitable than the one that we have today. And this is an issue in which millions of Americans and people all over the world, and not an American issue, this is a global issue, because if the United States backs down and gives up on the effort to combat climate change all over the world, China, Russia, India, other countries are going to say, why are we doing it? Why are we transforming our energy system? Look at America, they're not doing it. So millions of us have got to stand up and tell Mr. Trump to read a little bit about science. To the scientific community and not the CEOs of the fossil fuel. Let me just, before EJ comes out, let me just read a few words, a couple of pages, in order to get the discussion going from the very beginning, the introduction to the book. This is what I wrote. When we began our race for the presidency in April 2015, we were considered by the political establishment and the media to be a fringe campaign, something not to be taken seriously. After all, I was a senator from a small state with very little name recognition. Our campaign had no money, no political organization, and we were taking on the entire Democratic Party establishment. And by the way, we were also running against the most powerful political operation in the country. The Clinton machine had won the presidency for Bill Clinton twice and almost won the Democratic presidential nomination for Hillary Clinton in 2008. When our campaign finally came to a close in July 2016, it turned out that the pundits had got it wrong, big time. We had made history and run one of the most consequential campaigns in the modern history of the country, a campaign that would, in a very profound way, change America. We received more than 13 million votes in primaries and caucuses throughout the country. We won 22 states, more than a few by landslide proportions. We won 1,846 pledged delegates to the Democratic Convention, 46% of the total. Importantly, in virtually every state, we won a strong majority of younger people, the future of America. We won large percentages of the vote from white, black, Latino, Asian American, and Native American youth. We set the agenda for the America of tomorrow. Thank you.
I love you too. It's great to be here tonight. A real honor to be at GW and with Senator Sanders, and also at an event organized by Politics and Prose, which isn't just a bookstore, but a great institution in this city. It is, you might say, if you're in a Bernie Sanders crowd, a community organization. And what they do to organize public discussion and public debate is extraordinary, and I am just very happy to be here for that. But this is a grave and serious moment, and I'll get to this. Senator Sanders, in his book, has really nice things to say about the media. Its tendency to its tendency to focus on side issues. But precisely because it's a grave moment, and because you have written this book, Senator, there are a few moments at the beginning of the book about yourself that that I didn't know, and that I think people in the audience, as they approach the book, might be interested in knowing. I did not know, for example, that the Boy Scouts made your political career possible, in a manner of speaking. And I just love you. I want to ask just a couple of things about you. I want to ask a couple of things about your early life. The Boy Scout story is quite wonderful. For every student athlete, I want you to know that Bernie Sanders got cut from his high school basketball team. Obviously influenced by the corporate media back then. But you went on to become a track star, a runner. I was curious, this you have in common with President Obama. You're a democratic socialist, but you are a very competitive person. And I'd like you to talk about sort of those two experiences, and I have one other early life experience before we get to the other questions. By the way, thank you all. I went through hundreds of questions back there. You've asked excellent questions. I've tried to lump some of them together in categories, and there are some I'll ask specifically. But the Boy Scouts, basketball, running, and sports.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Some of you have heard of it. And I grew up in a low middle class neighborhood. I lived in a rent-controlled apartment. Our family did not have a whole lot of money. And what I mentioned in the book, which I think had a profound impact on me, is one way the world has changed, not necessarily, I think, for the better. When we were kids, EJ, what we would do is we'd go out into the street or into the schoolyards, and we would play ball from morning to night. And we did it all ourselves. We didn't have any coaches, we didn't have any referees, we worked it all out. And it was, and as I think about it in retrospect, it turns out that it had been a very democratic approach. Everybody knew you couldn't bullshit anybody else. You knew if you were the best ball player or the third best. Everybody knew it. There was no argument about that. And we worked it out whether you were safe at second base or not. Who brought the bat, who brought the ball, whether we were going to play football or punch ball or baseball. It was a means of young people without adult supervision working out things so that they can play actively and fairly, choose up their teams, decide who wins or loses. If we're playing basketball, it's a three-man game. my team beats your team quietly goes to the side, another team comes on, they beat me, we go off to the side. Everybody understood the rules. It was really interesting. It was very much a democratic approach to how we do things. Now, what happened is our family didn't have a lot of money, and in the summertime, my parents would send my brother and me, or him early, he was older, to Boy Scout camp, 10-mile River Boy Scout camp in Narrowsburg, New York. And we went up there, and I said, oh my God, look at this. This is the country. There are stars in the night. And we slept in lean-tos, which was small structures without any doors. The mattresses that we have were literally hay put into sheets. It was a pretty primitive way of living, but I loved it. I really did. That was my first introduction to rural life, and certainly influenced my decision early on to move to the state of Vermont.
By the way, Senator Sanders still remembers, I quote the book, I ran the mile in 4:37, fast enough for third place in the New York City Indoor Mile Championship. Later in the book, you talk about a group of organizations you joined when you were in college, and you talk about YPSL, the Young People's Socialist League, the Student Peace Union, and the Congress of Racial Equality. In the book, you don't actually talk about why you joined the Young People's Socialist League. What was it about democratic socialism at that moment when most Americans did not think of themselves as democratic socialists? I guess not that many do now, but more than then. What made you join YPSL?
Well, you know, you're asking a very profound question of which I can't answer. That is, you're really asking, how do we turn out the way we turn out, and why do we become the people we become? Ever since I was a little kid, I really did not like to see bullies. I didn't like to see, stronger kids picking on weaker kids. I didn't like, discrimination. I didn't like that. I didn't like power plays on the part of people who had the power. But that was just kind of instinctual. And, as a kid, I felt strongly about racism and poverty. And when I went to the University of Chicago, I was not a good student. But what I did do was spend an enormous amount of time down in what they call the stacks of the library. It's a very good library. And I would bury myself in there, reading everything that I could read about history and politics and sociology and economics and psychology. I did a whole lot of reading. I was not a terrible, well, it's not a good student, let's say that. But I did a whole lot of reading. But what the Young People's Socialist League did to me, it helped me put two and two together in my mind. In other words, we don't like poverty, we don't like racism, we don't like war, we don't like exploitation. What do they all have in common? And people say, well, I'm against poverty, but why, for example, at a time when we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, why do we have 43 million people living in poverty? Why do we have such an unfair distribution of wealth and income? What does wealth and power mean? How does it influence politics? Money always played a dominant role, a very important role in who gets elected. Now, as a result of Citizens United, it is far worse. Who decided that World War I would take place? Who even knows why we went to war in World War I? What was that about? Who makes these decisions? So what my studies tried to do was put two and two and two together. And that is why, I kind of evolved to an analysis which tries to explain to me what goes on in the world today and then.
One other thing that I noticed in the book, in personal terms, is you come back to clothing a number of times. And one of the first crisis you faced when you were elected mayor of Burlington, and I quote, was purchasing clothing suitable to the mayor. At the time, I didn't own a suit, just one or two corduroy sports jackets and a few ties. It wasn't my intention to become the best-dressed mayor in America, or even to wear a tie all that often. I thought, however, that a little sprucing up wouldn't hurt. Overnight, my wardrobe doubled in size.
You know, and I also said that's absolutely true. People of Burlington, Vermont will attest to it. But what's also true is a few years ago I had the distinction of being named by some Inside the Beltway magazine here to be the worst dressed member of the United States Senate. I can say, if you think I am badly dressed now,
let me, I like button-down shirts myself. Let me move to the political a little bit, and this will move us to the questions. When you talk in the book about thinking of running for president, you have some interesting things to say about Mrs. Clinton. On the one side, you talk about an experience you had with her explaining her healthcare program, and you write she knew that plan backward and forward. She also answered questions flawlessly. 25 years later, this is when President Clinton was trying to pass healthcare reform. 25 years later, I still marvel at that performance. Yet you also are very critical of her on the same page. The Clinton approach was to try to merge the interests of Wall Street and corporate America with the needs of the American middle class, an impossible task. While the Clinton administration can boast some positive accomplishments, I supported Bill Clinton. There were major policy flaws. Tell me about, after this is all over, what is your attitude toward the Clintons, toward the politics, and toward Mrs. Clinton at the end of this campaign?
The section of the book you referred to was an event that I went to at Dartmouth Medical School. And I was then in the Congress, and Hillary Clinton was First Lady and leading Bill Clinton's effort, the administration's effort for health care reform. And I was able to hitch a ride on Air Force 2 with her. We chatted for a while. We went to Dartmouth, because Dartmouth's only across the river from Vermont. And what blew me away is she got up there, and I'm guessing now, it's a long time ago, but maybe for an hour, she spoke without any notes whatsoever, without a note, on an enormously complicated program, which was their health care approach, which was too complicated. But she knew it all. My point was that she was not just a front person for the Clinton healthcare plan. She had helped write it. She really knew it. She answered questions flawlessly. And this tells me that we have an extraordinarily intelligent person. And that was the memory then. And that hasn't changed. I have a lot of respect for Hillary Clinton. We've known each other for 25 years. God tell you, know each other for better or worse, a little bit more in the last year and a half. And she's a very impressive, and I like her a lot. On the other hand, what is very clear is her politics and Bill Clinton's politics are very different than mine in terms of their policy views and in terms of their understanding of how you change America. In terms of policy, it was the Clinton administration that brought forth NAFTA, and I suspect if a Democrat had not been president at that time, NAFTA would not have passed. And I think that was the beginning of a series of disastrous trade agreements done at the behest of the corporate world. Big money wanted these trade agreements. They wrote these trade agreements. It was the Clinton administration that brought about the deregulation of Wall Street, led by Robert Rubin, formerly from Citibank, I think at that point. Major Wall Street force. And the point that I'm making is I happen to believe that at the end of the day, politically, you have to make a decision. This is really the debate that we're going to have within the Democratic Party right now. And that debate is, which side are you on? Can you go out and raise substantial sums of money from the wealthy and Wall Street and other powerful special interests, and then convince the American people that you are on the side of workers and the middle class? Or do you finally have to say that we are going to take on the oligarchs, We are going to take on Wall Street and the drug companies and the insurance companies and the corporate media, and that we are going to bring millions of working people together to create a very different type of party, Democratic Party, than currently exists. And that is a fundamental difference that exists between Bill and Hillary Clinton and myself.
I was going to ask you the next question later, but let me just put it to you now. Well, looking through the hundreds of questions, there were a number of people in the audience who basically talked about how the Democratic Party had treated you unfairly, what were you going to do about that, what was going to happen to the party, and when some Clinton supporters, just people knew I was doing this, they wanted me to ask you in a rather pointed way, do you think that what you did in the primaries hurt Hillary Clinton? I'm sure you saw it and didn't like it. The distinguished scholar Vita Scotchpole's letter in the New York Times, where she talked about your told you so message that you're giving. Now, I'll just quote her, Mr. Sanders' refusal to concede in a timely way, as Hillary Clinton won many million more votes, his constant harping that she was corrupt furthered Mr. Trump's message and contributed to the con man's catastrophic victory. What do you say to those critics?
Well, I say to those critics, number one, that you could argue the exact reverse, that maybe I would have been elected president of the United States. Behind that question is that I guess we should anoint candidates for president. That a serious debate or candidates competing against each other is somehow a bad thing for democracy. The truth is, EJ, my campaign brought millions of people into the political process, many of whom I suspect the overwhelming majority of whom ended up voting for Hillary Clinton. Dealing with the first part of the question, I think many people have read some of the Wikipedia, the Podesta emails that were released. And, if you read those emails, I think you learn that, to say the very least, the DNC was not a neutral force in the campaign. That we had to take on, and I'm proud of this, we had to take on virtually the entire Democratic establishment. So, do I think our campaign, in a sense, made Hillary Clinton a better candidate? Yeah, I do, and I'll tell you why. Because by the end of the campaign, she was against the Keystone Pipeline. By the end of the campaign, she was against supporting making public colleges and universities tuition free. And I think those and other ideas that we incorporated into the Democratic platform, which is the most progressive party platform in the history of this country, I think all of that, in fact, made Hillary Clinton a stronger candidate.
The Scotchpole letter was saying you shouldn't have run. It was a critique of what you did after the votes were counted, after
Right. Apparently people thought that people in California and 4 other states on June 7th should not have a right to determine who they wanted to see as the
No, I'm talking about after California.
No, after California, this was my approach. My approach was to say I am fully prepared to support Hillary Clinton. By the way, very few people in this country worked harder for Hillary Clinton than I did. What I was also determined to do is to say to Secretary Clinton, okay, we got 13.4 million votes. Obviously, you want those votes. I understand that. And I want you to have those votes. But you know what? I want you to speak to what many of those people told me during the campaign. They want to make public colleges and universities tuition-free. They want to expand health care. They want you to be a more progressive candidate. And that, in fact, ended up happening, and I think that was an asset and a positive thing to Secretary Clinton's campaign.
There were a number of questions about the media, and I will just read a paragraph from your book. According to a study of media coverage of the 2016 primaries by the Shortstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy, only 11% of coverage focused on candidates' policy positions, leadership abilities, and professional histories. I find that hard to believe. My personal sense is that number is much too high. A couple of things on that. Talk about your critique of the corporate media, and how does that fit in with the fact that Donald Trump has been waging a campaign on the media as allegedly liberal and is clearly trying to discredit, if you will, factually oriented media? How does your critique fit with Trump's critique?
Well, it doesn't fit at all.
I thought you might say that.
Well, here is the issue. It is, in fact, I think the title of the chapter is Corporate Media, a Threat to Our Democracy. This is serious stuff, and it is all the more serious because you're not going to see it discussed on television. It's not going to be. And it's not going to be in most newspapers. But here's what you got. You have approximately 6 major media conglomerates, Time Warner, etc., who now control about 90% of the what we call media, which means that a handful of giant conglomerates exercise enormous power over what the American people see, hear, and read. And we have got to disabuse ourselves of the idea that NBC and CBS and CNN and Fox, all these guys, they're objective. They're kind of referees. They're going to give both sides of the story. The function of corporate media, and I hope I don't shock anybody, is to make money. That is their job. They're a business. They make money. And in fact, somebody like a Donald Trump, and EJ, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you're familiar with this, I think the head of CBS and CNN both said Trump was great for them. He was outrageous, he said outrageous things, their ratings went up, put them on again. Every time you turn on the television, there's Donald Trump saying something outrageous, attacking somebody, great TV. Now we had the misfortune of not being a campaign which believed that we should viciously attack our opponent. Okay, and I try to run as positive as possible. Believe that a campaign of what democracy is about is taking a hard look at the real issues facing the country and offering solutions to those problems. Problem is, I could not do that in 3 seconds. And problem is, that is not what media is interested in. Getting back to what EJ just read. And what he read is that study after study tells us most of television coverage is attacks. All right? And that works very well for television. How much discussion, and this blew me away, and this is in the book. I quoted some guy who did a study. And this is what the study said. The study said they looked at television over a period of time, and they wanted to see how much discussion there was of poverty on television. I think it was the evening news, or Sunday news shows, I can't remember. Turns out that 2/3 of the entire discussion of poverty was based on things that I said. Now that is pretty pathetic. That one candidate does 2/3 of the discussion about one of the most important issues facing this country. Do you know how much discussion there is about climate change on the evening news? Virtually none. Do you know how much discussion there is about comparing the American healthcare system to what goes on around the rest of the industrialized world, where every country on earth guarantees healthcare to all people? Virtually none. So the point about my critique was not that media hates me and all that stuff. That wasn't the point. The point was that in a democracy, we need serious discussion about serious issues. And that is not what the corporate media is giving us. Trump's problem is, what the media was discovering, is that he was a pathological liar. And I don't say that. I'm not into, I really don't. I have many Republican friends and we disagree. But every day this guy would say something that was completely off the wall. He was the only person in America who saw on television Muslims celebrating the destruction of the Twin Towers. Nobody else in America saw that on television except Donald Trump. And he was absolutely convinced that he saw that. And on it goes. And the media had a hard time because they were trying to say, well, that's not quite true. And he would take offense to that. That's a very different critique than my friends.
I'm looking for a question that someone asked to follow up on that, which was something like, what in the heck happened? Or a third grader in the audience asked, then, I add the then, why did so many people vote for Trump, if that is the case?
Well, I think I tried to cover that in my earlier remarks. And let us be clear. There are people in America who are racists. There are people in America who are sexists, who are homophobes, who saw in the very ugly remarks made by Mr. Trump somebody who they felt comfortable with. But let me also say, I believe that those people are a very small minority of the people who voted for Mr. Trump. As I said earlier, I think what Trump tapped is the sentiment that there are millions of working class people, totally ignored by the media, totally ignored by this establishment, people who are hurting. Do you know, EJ, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the studies that have recently come out, where you have, in many parts of this country, working class people are seeing a decline in life expectancy. Have you seen that? Where they, in an ahistorical way, unprecedented around the world, you are seeing people who are living shorter lives than their parents because of the despair which leads them to drugs, to alcohol, and to suicide. People are hurting. They're worried about their children. They're making $10 an hour or $12 an hour, and they're not going anyplace, and they're worried that the kids may even do worse. They're worried about what happens when they get old. Trump said, I hear you. And I alone, I know how the system works, and I alone can improve your life. So I think a lot of people gave up on the Democratic Party in terms of standing up for working people, and they said, okay, I'm going to go with this guy. But let me also say, and we should not forget this, that Trump enters the White House as the least popular person in this position in the history of this country. So don't think that everybody agrees with his sexist remarks, his attacks on women, his racist remarks. That would not be the case. I think there are a lot of people out of desperation saying, I'm hurting, I'm in pain, I'm worried about my kids. This guy says he's going to do something for me, I'm going to give him a shot. That's my opinion.
I've always thought that's... study explained a lot about this election, and its authors referred to them as despair deaths in the working class. I want to lump three ideas together. First, I have to give a shout out, and forgive me if I get your name wrong, to Megan Fong-Mecken, or Megan Fong-Mecken. The reason I give her a shout out is that today is her 21st birthday, and she's scared. Where she could have had her first legal drink. And she asked a question, I'll just read the way she put it because I thought it was a lovely question. And I want to link it to several others. She said, there are so many people who say young people are only activists because they are millennials who are idealistic and think it's cool. How did you combat this when you were 21? What advice would you give to us? Then there were a whole stream of questions about what do we do now about the election of Donald Trump. And so to those two, I want to append my own, which is, in your remarks tonight, you talked about how you look forward to working with Trump on a whole series of issues. Then you criticized him for naming Steve Bannon. You criticized his racism. There is, as you know, a very strong fear in the progressive community of normalizing Trump at all. A real fear of an authoritarian streak. Masha Gessen, a wonderfully, really courageous Russian dissident, wrote a very powerful piece last week about autocracy and how autocrats very slowly make us think that the abnormal is normal, and before you know it, your rights are gone. Harry Reid has been very vocal in saying it's Trump who has to win our confidence. We don't owe it to him. How does the working with him fit with the need to resist normalizing this? And then to go back, what do you tell Megan and all the people out there who ask, what do we do?
Let me start off with Megan and say that, as I try to suggest early on, that every person out here is enormously powerful if you are prepared to use your power. And that in a democracy, we are strong when people stand up and fight back. And we are weak when we do not do that. So what I say to Megan and to everybody here and everybody in this country, the majority of the people in this nation are not racists, they're not sexist, they're not homophobes. And if we stand together, Mr. Trump will not be able to implement policies that are racist, sexist, and homophobic. Second of all, I think what we also have got to recognize, and what Trump's success was about, which the media inside the Beltway people do not understand, is there are millions of people who are hurting. So what we are going to do is say to Mr. Trump, you told us in the campaign you were going to take on Wall Street, but now a lot of Wall Street advisors are flocking to your campaign. Are you going to be a hypocrite, or do you have the guts to do the right thing? You said you're going to rebuild the infrastructure and create millions of jobs. In other words, our job is when he comes up with ideas that make sense for working people, I think we should be working with him. When he is racist and sexist and homophobe and Islamophobe, I think we are going to be vigorously in opposition. And I think on climate change, there is no compromise. We have got to look like that. And this gets back to transforming the Democratic Party. Ordinary people have got to know that the Democratic Party has the guts to stand up to some very powerful people today whose greed is destroying the middle class and working class of this country. And if we can't do that, I don't see much of a future for the Democratic Party.
Pass along a thought from the Canadian NDP is looking for a new leader. Could you propose yourself? That aside, and the other, I like the chutzpah here, internship with question mark. There were a lot of questions about what Democrats should do about the Supreme Court vacancy. Dahlia Lithwick, the great writer on the court, recently said that Democrats should, on principle, oppose any nominee that Trump makes because it's an illegitimate nomination, given the blocking of Merrick Garland. What do you think about that, and what will Democrats do now that you are responsible and in the leadership?
I can only speak for myself. But I think the questioner makes, or the writer that you quote makes a very good point. Look, the Republican Party has been extraordinarily arrogant in recent years. The idea that they would not even hold a hearing for Garland when it is crystal clear that our Constitution provides for the President to nominate an individual to become Supreme Court Justice, and the Senate holds hearings and goes about its business about whether or not they want to approve that individual. And Republicans refuse to abide by the Constitution. And I think if the Republicans think, oh, we're going to bring forth our person, and we expect you to go along with quick hearings and to vote for this person, to say the least, I think they have another thing. They better think twice about that. It is obviously terribly important what happens in the Senate and what happens in the House, but it is far, far more important what happens at the grassroots level in this country. I was named today, as you indicated, a part of the leadership. I think my title is to be head of outreach efforts, and that's something that I take very seriously. So I think, again, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's the fight against bigotry, whether it's the fight for climate change, our job is to bring millions of people together. Republicans are many things. They are not dumb. And especially with regard to young people. If they see millions of young people demanding action on climate change, demanding that our energy system be transformed, if they see young people saying, we do not want to leave college $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 in debt. If young people are prepared to stand up, if working people are prepared to stand up and demand a minimum wage, which is a living wage, if we're all prepared to stand up and demand pay equity for women, if we are prepared to fight for a woman's right to choose, and millions... Everybody here knows it. Republicans will control the presidency, they'll control the House, they'll control the Senate, they control almost 2/3 of the state legislatures around the country. That is the fact. Our job is to take politics outside of Capitol Hill. And that is to mobilize people. And if the Republicans, Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan, these are not dummies. And if they look around and they say, we are about to lose an entire generation of young people, we better move. We better become more reasonable in our approach. I believe we can do that, but our job is to mobilize people to stand up and fight back.
Let me ask you a Bernie Sanders-like question right back to that, which is you've spoken over and over again about corruption in the political system, the power of political money. Young people have voted against the Republicans now for 3 or 4 elections in a row. People have mobilized on climate change. They haven't moved at all. How can this penetrate? And it goes to a series of questions here on the links between protest politics and protest movements against Donald Trump and other forms of political action. How do you answer that? Because if what you say is true, there should have been some movement from the Republicans quite a while ago.
Well, the political difficulty that we have, and this frightens me very, very much, and should frighten every American, is that we are rapidly losing our American democratic traditions. And by that I mean in Vermont, we have town meetings, people come out and they yell at each other, and it's one person, one vote. Democracy wins. What we are seeing now as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision is the ability of billionaires to buy elections. And let me be very clear about this. Mitch McConnell and many Republicans believe that Citizens United did not go far enough. They believe that we should end all campaign finance restrictions, limitations, and that billionaires should be able to give directly, not independent expenditures. That if you want to run for office, the Koch brothers will come up to you and say, EJ, here is $1 billion. We're going to support your campaign for presidency, and we will give you your staff. You work for us. You're essentially a paid employee of the Koch brothers. Now, we got to figure out, that's number one. And number two, we got to deal with the Republican effort and voter suppression all over this country. Jesse Jackson today, and he is deeply concerned about what's going on in North Carolina and elsewhere, where very intentional efforts, as you all know, designed by Republican governors and attorney general to make it harder for people of color, for poor people, for young people, old people to vote. So we got a lot of work on our hands, let me tell you. I mean, this is not easy stuff, and it's not good enough for people to say, well, gee, I went to a demonstration yesterday, the world didn't change, I'm giving up. That's not the way it happens. Put yourself into an historical context. Think about the struggles 100+ years ago that workers went through in order to gain dignity on the job and to form unions. Think about what women went through for a very long period of time in order to get the right to vote, in order to get the right to have an education or the job that they wanted. Some of those women died in the struggle. Some went on hunger strikes. Some ended up in jail. Think about the struggles of the gay community. How many decades and decades they fought with their straight allies in order to make sure that people have the right to marry someone regardless of their gender. Change does not come easily. We are in a struggle. And we are in a struggle against very, very powerful people who want it all. That's the bad news. The good news is there are a hell of a lot more of us than there are of them. And we got to be smart.
There were two questions in the pack that I thought a lot of people in the audience might be interested in hearing you answer. One from Will was, what did you think of Larry David and how he plays and the other is from Elizabeth, who asked, if you were stuck on a desert island with 3 politicians, that begs the question of whether you want to be stuck on a desert island with 3 politicians. Larry David and that question.
PJ, I gotta tell you this. I am Larry David. Sanders is back in Vermont, and I'm here, and you felt me. Gotta tell you something else about television. Go on Saturday Night Live, and suddenly a lot of people know you who didn't know you before. Larry David is a brilliant comedian. He's a brilliant guy, and it's a little bit scary watching him do me. Better than I do. So it's, in terms of the second question, one of the before I ran for mayor of Burlington, I did a video, and what I wanted to do, what I would have done it probably in my life if I had got elected mayor, was to try to talk about political figures in our history who've kind of been wiped out of history, who media doesn't talk about very much. And there's some extraordinary people throughout our history who have done remarkable, courageous things that we don't know about. I did a video about one of the great people in American history. His name is Eugene V. Debs.